Distinguished guests, colleagues and friends, good evening. Buonasera a tutti. I am Paolo Baracchi and I work in the cultural program here at CO.A.S.IT. Before we start, I would like to invite you to join me in acknowledging the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people of the Kulin Nation, the traditional custodians of the land on which we gather. We pay our respects to their elders past and present, and we extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people present here today. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to the launch of Giorgione, Dante, and the Sydney Incunable, edited by Janie Anderson and John Garnier. This event is presented by CO.A.S.IT in partnership with ANZAMEMS and with the Melbourne chapter of the Dante Alighieri Society. It is held in conjunction with the 15th Biennial Conference of ANZAMEMS, the Australian and New Zealand Association for Medieval and Early Modern Studies. I welcome the book's editors, Professors Anderson and Garnier, and Professors Andrea Rizzi and Christopher Marshall, who will be officially launching the book. It has been a privilege and a pleasure to collaborate with you on this initiative. The list of distinguished scholars joining us either in person or remotely is too long for me to acknowledge everyone, so please forgive me. I would like to welcome international guests and especially Dr. Andreina Rita and Dr. Sara Simone, two authors who have contributed to the volume and who are joining us via Zoom from the Vatican Library in Rome. I would also like to welcome our guests who have travelled from Sydney to be with us tonight. John Garnier, Elizabeth Leating, Julie Sommerfeld, Kim Wilson, and Philip Kent, the former librarian at the University of Sydney Library, which is both the repository in which the Incunable is held and the founder of this project. I cannot think of a better way to conclude CO.A.S.IT's Italian-Australian Cultural Programme for 2025 than with this Australian story, which has become an international story through the pathways of excellence in different fields so well represented in this book. Giorgione, Dante and the Sydney Incunable allows us to reconnect in fresh ways with one of the most enigmatic artists of the Italian Renaissance, who is also one of the greatest. By doing so, it affords us a precious opportunity in troubled times to reassert our right of abode in the shared home of humanity and of art. I now have the pleasure of introducing to you our first speaker, who is one of the editors of this erudite and remarkably beautiful publication. Janie Anderson is Professor Emeritus at the University of Melbourne. She is an art historian, curator, and biographer who has spent much of her life investigating the Italian Renaissance. From the age of 15, when her parents took her to Venice, she has written about Venetian art and often about Giorgione. She has curated exhibitions for the National Gallery of Art in Washington and the Kunsthistorisches Museum in Vienna. In 1970, she was the first woman Rhodes Fellow at the University of Oxford, where she lectured until 1991. She was Herald Chair of Fine Arts at the University of Melbourne from 1997 to 2014. From 2008 to 2012, she was International President for the Committee of Art History. In 2015, she received a knighthood, Ufficiale dell'Ordine della Stella d'Italia, from the President of the Republic of Italy for distinguished research on Venetian Renaissance art. She tells me that she has often wished to leave Giorgione behind, but he always emerges to surprise her. So I thank you for your attention. And before I pass to Professor Anderson, I would like to remind you that today's event is being recorded. I would also like to encourage you to take advantage of this opportunity to purchase your very own copy of this splendid publication. So without any further ado, it is my pleasure to invite Professor Anderson to address us. Please make her welcome.
May I begin by thanking Dr. Paolo Baracchi and the Society of Dante, I'm a bit emotional, for hosting this event. It's a very civilized place to have a book launch, and I feel very much at home here in this wonderful situation. And I thank our colleagues from Sydney for coming down, because it's wonderful to see you here. And I would like to emphasize that this is a book that is about collaboration. Collaboration in an extraordinary way between people in research, in conservation, in the synchrotron in Melbourne, the National Gallery of London, the National Gallery of Washington, and we have consulted far and wide, and we have really put something together which I think we can all be proud of. My task this evening is not to talk about the other authors but just to think about Giorgione in a new way. And as Paolo said, I've been thinking about Giorgione for quite a long time. And when I wrote this book in 1997, I thought, that's enough. It's too difficult. It's a terrible subject. No one ever agrees with you. There must be easier things to work on. So then this remarkable, I got an email from Kim Wilson saying that, please reply, you don't know me, but would you look at this? So I looked at it and I couldn't believe it. Then I rang Gabriele Finaldi at the National Gallery in London, and I said, well, can you send me an infrared of the underdrawing on the Adoration of the Magi? Because I think it's like this drawing that we've just discovered. So he was delighted, and within a week, he sent it to me. And then I consulted with Washington, and then I went up to Sydney and met Julie for the first time, who managed, I must say, the initial discovery beautifully, because once you've got something so exciting, you don't want it to go out into the press anyway. So these people who are naysayers, who don't believe in what you've just discovered, and so it was very good to launch it in the Burlington magazine. And then the second part of the project was hosted by Philip Kent, who we'd all known and had a wonderful time collaborating with in Melbourne on diverse projects. But then he was appointed librarian in Sydney, and he embraced the project very, very well. And he found the funds for it. And then we took the book to the Vatican Conservation Laboratory. When we published the article in Burlington magazine, I was written to by all sorts of excellent restorers in Italy saying they'd like to look at the book and see if it was authentic or not. And I didn't know, who to decide. So I asked my friend Salvatore Settis, who should we go to? And he said, oh, well, the Vatican Conservation Laboratory. They have 8,000 rare books, and they had 3 other copies of this same edition of Dante. So we went in 2022, and Philip organized this. So we had a long meeting with the Vatican, and I know that Dr. Andrea Narita and Sarah Simoni are listening and will join us later on for the discussion. Well, I'm just going to talk now about what this means for Giorgione, and the research is still going on. I get emails from people in Italy, several a week sometimes, with ideas about who the handwriting might be by, all this sort of thing. Now, I've called my essay in the book Giorgione the Dream Maker, and this is because dream maker is a word that I think slightly flamboyant translation of Fintore, which is one of the words in the inscription, which we'll look at in a moment. And this is the page that was discovered on the edition of Dante in the University of Sydney of the 1497 edition, and has at the top an inscription, and on the lower left a drawing of the Virgin and Child. And the inscription tells us, exactly Giorgione's dates of birth and death, which we never knew before. And this is pretty rare because we don't know when Titian was born, or when Bellini was born, or many other artists of this period. So this is the drawing, and it seems like a little thing, but in fact it's a drawing of considerable beauty. And the mark making, the papery lines are very, very individual. And they're very like this drawing that you see on the right, which is an underdrawing in London of the National Gallery, Adoration of the Magi. And so on that basis, I think only a blind silly Billy would not believe that this was a drawing by Giorgione. And this is the Adoration of the Magi, the Adoration of the Kings, which is in London, which I've been showing more detail of in the underdrawing. It's a very unusual adoration. We don't know who it was made for, and there's no speculation even about who it was made for. I managed to take the provenance back to the 19th century, but it emerges as a Giorgione. And it's a very erotic painting if you look at the details on the right. Very unlike any other adoration of the Magi. So one imagines this is a private commission from an individual. Drawing in red chalk is something that is quite unusual. And on the left you have the drawing in Sydney, and on the right a detail of a drawing from Rotterdam that's often attributed to Giorgione. It's very different in its appearance, because at some stage in the 17th century a collector put it in a bath of water in order to restore it. So the lines have become rather fuzzy, and it's never been subject to conservation recently. But there are a group of drawings that may be attributed to him, but are all in red chalk. Now, the Sydney inscription gives us certain details about him, but there have been archivists in Veneto who have been, can't get this done, who have been working on documents that may tell us a bit more about Giorgione's life. And so I've done a sort of summary here. In one of the essays that I've written for the volume, I went through these things. Now, we probably know that his mother was someone called Alta Donna, and she may very well be a subject of La Vecchia. We know that she was a quite remarkable woman, that she had Giorgione, who was born when she was aged 34, which is very old for a woman in the Renaissance to give birth. And then her husband died early on, and she looked after her son, Zorzi or Giorgione, and in fact paid for him to get out of prison. A very small sum, but she sold land, and that's how we know about it. We don't know what Zorzi did, why he was put in prison, but maybe it was something fairly trifling, because the amount of money she got for it was very little. So these are the things that are emerging, and we already knew that there was a date on the back of one of the pictures that he worked for the Palazzo Ducale, and that he did the frescoes on the Foyer dei Tedeschi. So this is the sort of biography that's emerging of him, and it's quite sensational really, because most people have thought he was too mysterious to have ever been understood at all. One of the things that does emerge from these inventories of tax sheets and things is that the date probably of the Castelfranco altarpiece is 1499, and we know that possibly it was known well before it was discussed in print, because there are all these copies after the picture, and we're looking at one that is in the National Gallery in London on the right, and that has always been slightly disregarded. And in fact, it's evidence that well before the picture was discussed in print, it was available or known about as a special work of art. These are some of the other documents that have been found. The well-known letter from Taddeo Albano to Isabella Este of 1510, which gives a sort of approximate date for his death. And on the left, an inventory of probably of Giorgione's possessions that Renata Segre found. Renata found it just by accident, because she was doing a whole series of researches on Jews in Venice who had suffered from the plague, and she came across it just by chance. And this tells you that he had two books, and the two books may well be one in the Commedia and the other the Hypnotomachia Periphery, the Dream of Periphery. So what a library to have, you know, Dante's Commedia and the Periphery. Now this is the painting La Vecchia, which has always been known very well. It's a painting that has an enormous critical fortune. It's always been on exhibition in the academia. And I found an inventory years ago in which it was described by Titian's son and Tintoretto as being the mother of Giorgione by his own hand. And we now think that this may be Alta Donna. It's had recent restoration by Giulio Bono, and it looks absolutely wonderful in the academia. And he discovered that in the past, people had wanted to make her older, so they'd added labels to restoration and actually took them off. But this is in a way, if we think about Giorgione, what personal statements did he make? Well, this is one about his mother. Being of a certain age myself, I was interested in portraits of older women. And this one has had an extraordinary critical fortune. It's been on display in the academia. It's loved by Italians. It's just a, just a most amazing picture. And then the only statement we have by Giorgione about himself is this portrait of himself as David. It's mutilated. He was originally portrayed as David with the head of Goliath underneath. And it's quite a tormented picture. We know it wasn't commissioned because it's done on an old reused canvas. So this is Giorgione's only statement about himself. There's nothing in print that he actually wrote. And I leave you with that image and pass over to my two colleagues from the University of Melbourne, Andrea, who helped me a little bit with the inscription early on when we were working on the project, and then Christopher Marshall. This is a book about a book, and it's divinely produced by MEP. I want to thank my authors there, Catherine Smith and Louise Sterling, who were wonderful to work with.
Thank you. It is now my pleasure to invite Professor Andrea Rizzi, Casamarca Professor of Italian Studies at the University of Melbourne, to address us.
Thank you, Paolo. Thanks, Jane. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's a real privilege to have been asked to celebrate the publication of Giorgione, Dante, and the Sydney Incunable. I want to say congratulations to the authors here, but also online. I very much look forward to having a conversation with at least some of our authors here and online in a minute. So, this is a beautiful volume. It's a beautiful book, as Janie just said. It's a wonderful object that not only redefines our understanding of a single book held at the University of Sydney, but also demonstrates, I think, brilliantly and excitingly how the humanities thrive when scholars from many disciplines collaborate to address and perhaps, actually, very likely, if not convincingly, solve a cultural and historical puzzle. To put it in a slightly different way, we are here to celebrate a book that demonstrates what happens when a library, a team of scholars, a group of conservators and scientists, and an international network of experts converge around a single, tantalizing object, a 1497 Venetian edition of Dante's Commedia. Here it is. A edition printed by Pietro Quarenghi, trimmed, rebound, damaged, repaired, re-examined, and miraculously revealed to contain a drawing in red chalk, as we've just heard, that is now conclusively attributed to Giorgione. But the story that this volume tells is not straightforward, and I think you've gathered that. It is not a tale of one glamorous discovery made in a flash of insight. It is instead a detective story, slow, cumulative, multi-layered, and profoundly collaborative. It is a story in which every discipline matters: book history, art history, paleography, whatever that means, social history, conservation science, library studies, and even particle accelerator physics. Yes, the synchrotron that Janie referred to, and the synchrotron radiation, most importantly. All of this work and disciplines play a very crucial role in illuminating a single, deceptively quiet page at the back of an Incunable. And it is a story that, at its heart, reminds us of the extraordinary power of marginalia. Those scribbles, notes, sketches, corrections, and traces left behind by people who lived hundreds of years ago. It reminds us that the margins of books are the margins of life: messy, unexpected, human, infinitively precious. And just as a taste, before we get into the actual marginalia that we have in this beautiful Incunable, I just want to give you a taste of the importance of studying margins, handwritten notes, comments. This is a very famous manuscript owned by Petrarch, Italian author of the 14th century, who scribbled lots of copied and then made annotations to his own personal copy of Virgil's work. And again, the importance of finding annotations, inscriptions about who owned that text at a particular time, in a particular crucial cultural historical instance, tells us a lot about who owned it for a period of time. It tells us a lot about what happened to the book when it was bought, sold, passed around. So they're objects that travel, objects that are shared, used, and yes, damaged over centuries. Again, this is a printed text that gives us a sense of, again, who proudly owned this particular edition, as we see in the handwritten note on the top. And then layers of notes and notations about what happened after that particular copy was sold, passed around, and so on. So just a taste, I'll give you a taste of what these marginalia really do and mean to scholars like us. But let me now move to the Incunable that we are celebrating and the work around Incunable that we're celebrating tonight. And I was a bit worried about spoiler alerts, but I think that I shouldn't worry too much about it.
About what?
Spoiler alerts, about spoiling too much. But as the preface to the volume, to the book recounts, the chain of events begins not in the Renaissance, but one evening in 2017 in the Fisher Library reading room. Scholars and philanthropists were being shown a small selection of treasures from the University of Sydney's Rare Book collection. Some Incunables, a Dante or two, and among them, unassumingly, this 1497 Commedia. A book, it's important to say, that is incomplete. It's missing its first gallery. It's trimmed at its edges. And in one catalogue, dismissed as a WAF, WAF, with all faults. A book that had travelled from Venice to London to Sydney, accruing more questions than answers along the way. And then the moment of curiosity. Kim Wilson notices a red chalk drawing on the final page. Julie Sommerfeld encourages her to investigate further. Nerida Newbigin recognizes the word Zorzon, the Venetian name for Giorgione. And what follows is not a sudden eureka moment, but a careful scholarly unraveling, one email, one consultation, one comparison at a time. So to carry on the story, Janie Anderson receives a photograph. She compares the sketch to the underdrawing in Giorgione's Adoration of the Kings that we've just heard, a work that is held at the National Gallery in London. Conservators in London assist with high-resolution imaging, and the resemblance strengthens. And I could go on because it is actually a fascinating story, but as I said, I don't want to give too much away. Buy the book and you save the incredibly exciting, but painstakingly slow process. And I think what this book charts with enviable clarity is how careful discipline crossing scholarship replaces that initial spark of intuition with grounded collaborative knowledge. And as I sort of hinted at already, this is not a single discovery. It's, I like to call it an ecosystem of discoveries. And it's particularly exciting, at least from my perspective, to sort of see how this sort of model of interdisciplinarity that emerges from this book, it's really beautifully and generally integrated. So to give you a summary of the expertise that really has not only enriched the project, but also the beautiful book that we have before us, the book was made possible thanks to the hard work of art historians, Jenny Anderson, who recognized idiosyncrasies of a Venetian painter under drawing, book historians, Andreina Rita, Sara Simone, Kim Wilson, and Wallace Kirsup, who reconstruct printing practices, paper stocks, typefaces, and binding structures. Paleographers, such as, again, Rita and Simone, who analyze hands, inks, spellings, and the layered texture of 16th century inscription. Social and cultural historians like John Gagne, who trace the movement of books, ideas, and collectors across centuries. And library historians, such as Elizabeth Litting and Philip Kent, who piece together accession records, card catalogues, stamps, and the shadows of long-forgotten donors, whether they were surgeons, philanthropists, or simply generous bibliophiles. And there's more. There's conservators, again, Julie Sommerfeld, Kim Wilson, Paula Dredge, Annalise Treacy, with eyes trained to read a page like archaeologists read a site, observing every abrasion, fibre, crease, and repair. Engineers, chemical engineers like Darrell Howard, working both at the Art Gallery of New South Wales and the Australian Synchrotron, mapping minerals and elements that lie invisible to the human eye. And last but not least, software specialists at the Vatican Library, who use multispectral imaging, independent component analysis, and algorithmic reconstructions to visualize a drawing that a Renaissance painter left incomplete, or perhaps deliberately open to interpretation. So it's interdisciplinarity, not as a slogan or the word that we use every now and then in a university, but actually it's a method. It's a really exciting method. So consider, for instance, the marginalia in the text. Oopsie, sorry. That we've seen before. I think Jane showed it to us before. The books contain no book plates, no signature, no library stamps from the 21st of December 1928. It offers no direct evidence of who owned it in Venice, who took it to London, or who gave it to Sydney. It is in this sense silent. But it speaks to the drawing. It speaks to the chalk drawing that we've seen. A virgin and a child rendered with sensitivity and tenderness, lightly outlined in red chalk on a page otherwise filled with Landino's commentary, which is the commentary to the Commedia in the edition. It's not a decorative flourish. It's not a piece of idle doodling. It is, as the editors note, a personal meditation or a prayer to the Virgin, which appears on the preceding page. It is most likely a glimpse into an artist's mind at the moment of reading Dante. It's a very intimate kind of marginalia, you could say. It transformed the page into a meeting point between text and image, between poetry and painting, between Dante's words and Giorgione's own imagination. And it reminds us that marginalia are often the purest form of historical evidence. They show us not what people were supposed to think, but what they actually thought in the act of reading, the margins of their private encounters with a book. And I think the editors of the book and the authors really very successful in showing the meaningfulness of this interaction between image and text. One of the greatest pleasures I found reading this volume is that it never let us forget the materiality of this edition of the book that Giorgione most likely owned. And so the work that was undertaken, for instance, in the Vatican Library, the codicological work, the work on the actual materiality of the book, is really exciting. It compares paper stocks, watermarks, type impressions, collation structures, and it really shows how the Sydney Dante was made and how it survived. We have repairs, as I mentioned, we have tears, we have end-band replacements, rebackings. All of this is part of the life story of a book that has lived over more than 5 centuries. So it is a book that has something really rare because it does all of that really hard work and it presents in a way that is incredibly accessible. And especially in an age of digitization of text and ideas, everything is online, everything is on a repository, can be downloaded and so on. This book, I think, is a very powerful reminder of the materiality of books. And then, of course, there's a synchrotron. I have never had the chance to utter the statement that I'm about to utter. This project on a late 15th century book features a chapter on X-ray fluorescence mapping conducted at near light speeds. From my little perspective as an early modern historian, it is something that I've never said and probably will never be able to say again. But here we are. The synchrotron imaging confirmed the elemental composition of the red chalk, distinguishing it from the iron gold ink of the inscription and from the paper fibers beneath. It demonstrates that even a light and delicate sketch leaves a recognizable chemical trace when observed with the right technology. And in some ways, the beautiful chapter on the synchrotron and the work that happened there symbolizes the whole book. The past is illuminated by the most advanced tools and scholarship of the present. So to conclude my little contribution to the launch, I'd just like to return to the idea of the detective work. What this volume reveals, quietly but powerfully, is that detective work in the humanities is most successful when it's collective. There is no one genius here, no heroic scholar who discovers a masterpiece, but we see, as I mentioned before, a librarian noticing a chalk line, a paleographer, a conservator, an art historian, a scientist, a cataloger, a historian, an editor. All of these are incredible roles that actually interact with each other. Not just one role is filled by one person. Some of them, to most of those roles at the same time, come together to produce this amazing work. And I think finally, what this volume reminds us is why we need libraries, why we need to care for them, especially at a time when we're hearing cuts to state libraries, research centres, and universities. Without libraries that preserve the past, without librarians who know how to read the traces of time, without researchers who know how to listen to fragile pages and train a new generation to care for a multiple heritage, discoveries like this would never happen. So the Sydney Incunable is no longer simply one of 42 Incunables in the University of Sydney Library, although I'm hearing that that list has grown. That's very exciting. It is, as Janie Anderson notes, the most important Incunable in Australia. A book that changes how we understand Giorgione, the painter, how we date his life, how we imagine Renaissance reading practices, but also how we think about the movement of books across continents and centuries. And thanks to this edited volume, it is no longer silent. Its story is now told beautifully, rigorously, interdisciplinarily, and with the full force of the detective work it so richly deserves. So I will now pass the baton to my colleague, Christopher, and for the second part of the book launch. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Now my pleasure to invite Professor Christopher Marshall, Professor in Art History and Curatorship at the University of Melbourne, to address us. Please make him welcome.
So much. Great pleasure to be here to provide the art historical counterpart to the wonderful words and appreciation that we've had so far in celebration. Is incredibly innovative, interdisciplinary work that's gone into this also very beautiful book. Yeah, it's, as we've heard, an amazing discovery was made at the University of Sydney, and then what an incredible moment it happened to be the world expert on Giorgione just down the Hume Highway, and who wrote the catalogue raisonné on the artist, and also was one of the co-curators of the exhibition at the National Gallery of Art in Washington and the Kunsthistorisches Museum in Vienna. So it's sort of an amazing coming together of sort of extraordinary elements. And so just as I have been asked to sort of spoke on the art historical aspect, I think that it's wonderful that that did happen, because what I've always found about Janie's work in particular on Giorgione and on sort of the specialisation that she brings to this project, it's very powerful, as I say, that it's all about looking beneath the surface to reveal the secret lives of these really precious objects. And so even here in the catalogue raisonné that we were just mentioning before, this is sort of amazing, simple but extraordinary point that Janie makes about, and sort of discovery based on sort of technical analysis of this wonderful painting of Judith with the severed head of Holofernes at her feet by Giorgione. That, you know, we think of it as this kind of disembodied painting in a museum, but actually it spent its life, its early life, as a door with a keyhole there, and so that it actually was a part of the decor of this house. You sort of imagine opening it to get the sugar bowl out to make the coffee, and then closing it. So this sort of amazing sort of hidden world, the world of the lived experience, I guess you'd say, of these works of art. And then, you know, it literally comes out of the page in this extraordinary discovery that they made at the University of Sydney in their collection, with both a totally an inscription that sort of changes the whole story of Giorgione as interpreted by Janie, and then this amazing drawing showing the mind of the artist at work, all on that page. Just really extraordinary discovery, and as Andrea has been highlighting, incredible sort of deployment of interdisciplinary expertise brought together to analyse all the different elements. I was struck I mean, there are so many things that come out of this. I was struck by the way that Giorgione has been written down in this contemporary text as Orzon da Castellofranco, and as Janie says, it's perhaps the earliest use of that appellation Zorzon, which is which Janie then uses as sort of the basis to sort of reinterpret the chronology of Giorgione. But I was just struck by that. Zorzon, Giorgione, Big George, he's a big fellow, and it's a very human kind of way of sort of talking about him.
He's a giant killer.
Precisely as I'm about to say, Janie. Yes, indeed. And so, as Janie highlights in her chapter, it's very relevant to this incredible painting, which again, just as we've been saying, has had this incredible kind of misadventures through its life, and that all we have of it now is this little fragment showing the tormented visage of the artist. He should be so exultant in what he's done. He's David. He's just conquered he's killed the giant, as it were. And yet he's troubled. Why is he troubled? What is going on in this painting? And we have to go back to this amazing print. Sorry, I'm going the wrong way. going back. Sorry, going forward rather than back. Revealing all my best material here. There we go, keep going. Yes, so in the event, the point being that actually all we have is this wonderful print. And it struck me as rather amazing. Of course, Jamie's already written about this, but it is an amazing reminder of this extraordinary inversion that one finds in this painting, because the whole iconography of David and Goliath is that David is a shepherd boy who conquers this overwhelming giant. So of course he has to be very small and diminutive, and he chops the head of this giant off. And it's always this really struck me as very powerful, the way that whole relationship is inverted, and that in some ways David is the giant, almost dominating the severed head. The big heads Big George dominates the head, the severed head of Goliath, which we don't see anymore because we don't have the whole of that painting anymore. So that's another precious insight that comes out of this book. But what Janie looks at more particularly is at the basis of sort of reconstructing the intellectual development of Giorgione, and this kind of stereotype, really, I guess, that she sort of argues against, that a lot of the Renaissance artists, they weren't, highly intellectual, they were more sort of artisanal. Obviously, that's not true of Giorgione, who is an incredibly enigmatic, poetic, and almost ineffable painter in the sorts of concepts he talks about. And he was obviously deeply fascinated by the life of the mind and books, and that indeed one of those two books in the inventory that Janie's mentioned was this other Incunable, the Dream of Polypheme, from which Giorgione took the concept of the sleeping Venus. And then now, of course, we add the Dante to that with this incredible, please go the right way, we're going the wrong way, sorry. It's very, very strange. Come on, back.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, that's it. No. All right. Anyway, the point is, he's reading the Divine Comedy, and he's reading within that Bonaventura's prayer to the Virgin, and then that stimulates something in his mind, and he literally stops as he's reading, turns the page over and does this incredible drawing, which is sort of ghostly after all these years, but which is so suggestive. And, you're literally seeing his mind at work in this improvisational moment as he creates his image to go with the prayer. And it really, that struck me, is another version similar to the wonderful drawing by Leonardo of the Virgin Child with the cat, where he's literally trying to think through the way that the child can move in space in relation to just this cat that it's, picked up and tormenting. So, it's this beautiful moment, isn't it, in the early development of Renaissance art, where artists are sort of rethinking the whole concept of the Madonna and Child with reference to what they're seeing and what they're reading in the world around them, captured on the page. Totally beautiful, totally unique, an amazing discovery. As we've already heard, Janie then peels back the layers of this drawing and looks at the under drawing, which has really informed so much of her scholarship, of other related works, particularly the work that we just saw in the National Gallery in London, and this other work from the same group, in the National Gallery in Washington, the Benson Holy Family. You see the relationship there. And in fact, I remember as a young student when Janie just came to Australia with this fantastic lecture on Giorgione years ago now. She was talking about how that same painting she'd studied looked at the archive. So she's a real archivist looking at all of these layers to talk about the history, the sort of battered lives in a way that these paintings have had. So looking at the Duveen archives, the great dealer of the 20th century, she found this photograph of the Benson Holy Family. It had actually been vandalised at a certain point, and I was really transfixed by the point she was making about how psychologically iconoclasm often, the iconoclast is often drawn to the sort of the points of power within an object, particularly the face and particularly the eyes and the mouth. And I just thought that was a really amazing point, and it's about this same artwork that she's studying here. Finally, to finish, as Andre has already really beautifully highlighted, the incredible interdisciplinarity, bringing together all these scholars and specialisations coming out of a book is a really, you're really going to enjoy reading it, because we don't normally think of, you know, books in that way, I guess, as something sort of involving, you know, fine art, high art. We should, of course we should. Some of the greatest artists that have ever lived have been, you know, deeply inspired by the Divine Comedy and have tried to visualise it. Think of Botticelli. In fact, he did 2 attempts to visualise the Divine Comedy, but he did these incredible watercolours, which are now in the Kurfürstliche cabinet in Berlin. Beautiful. And of course, how could we forget our very own beautiful Dante watercolours by Blake, one of the greatest artworks in Australia. I think that's really important to kind of realise that it used to be that this was all part of a kind of a continuum of sort of art and creativity, and you know, the books and the beauty within books was not a separate thing from, you know, fine art in galleries. And in fact, in the State Library, till fairly recently, used to be that the word National Gallery was on the lintel here on the facade alongside the Melbourne Public Library, because of course they used to be all together and all their collections were all together. But at a certain point, understandably, of course, in the history of, you know, growth and expansion and specialisation and modernisation, etc., of course, the National Gallery of Victoria separated itself from the State Library and the Melbourne Museum and moved, as we know, down to St Kilda Road. But there was something that was lost, you know, in that process. This idea of the, as I say, continuity between prints and drawings and rare books and so-called fine art was severed in the process. This book reminds us of that sort of early history where it was all together. And yeah, we've mentioned it a few times, but it is so, you know, dynamically interdisciplinary and taking that into the future, that it has this incredible chapter and contribution from the synchrotron, which those better qualified than me can explain. All I know is that it has a wiggler in it, and it has an undulator, and they somehow relate together. I don't know that. Maybe silly. But it is an extraordinary, I mean, an amazing research, groundbreaking research facility that has been used for this project, creating a whole other sort of dimension of understanding about the creative process underpinning this very, very beautiful drawing. So commendable to you. How much is it being sold for?
55.
What?
Nothing
What?
at all.
That's unbelievable. If you go, you know, that's must go up the pipe now. Wonderful achievement, and I commend, you know, both editors and all of the wonderful contributors. It's a beautiful story, so well told. You will love reading it. Thank you very much.
We do have a little bit of time for a few questions, but before we sort of open it up to the floor, I wonder whether maybe we can show the contributors to this volume who are online, and we'll also see other members of the audience who are online. And as we mentioned before, we have two authors, Dr. Rita and Dr. Simone, who I think are online. So I'd like to just welcome them to this evening or morning. They're in Rome, so time frame. Hello. Very nice to see you, and congratulations as well. Just wonder whether maybe if I could just ask you, can you just say maybe a few words about the experience of seeing this copy travel all the way to Rome, and you then did this fascinating comparison of the copy that Sydney has with the copies of this very edition you have in the Vatican Library. If you're able to say a few words about...
Maybe repeat in Italian.
Posso in italiano se volete, se è più comodo. So, excuse me, I'll just translate quickly in Italian. Volevo solo due parole, proprio due parole sull'esperienza di avere questa copia che è tornata, se così si può dire, in Italia, per il confronto molto interessante che avete fatto con le copie che avete, le altre edizioni che avete in Vaticana. E così potete spiegare magari in due parole come è stata questa esperienza e in sintesi cosa avete scoperto? Una scoperta secondo me molto interessante. Se volete potete dire l'italiano e traduco, come preferite. We can't.
Sound.
C'è un attimo solo, c'è un problema di audio, non vi sentiamo.
Sì, va bene.
Potete riprovare?
La parte loro.
Può darsi che può essere che il vostro computer magari non sia settato in maniera corretta. Ancora non vi sentiamo. Da qui sembra tutto a posto, ma...
Pronto?
Sì, adesso vi sentiamo.
Adesso si sente?
Sì.
Sì, vi sentiamo. Prego.
La voce. Innanzitutto grazie mille, grazie per oggi, ma soprattutto grazie per l'esperienza che ci avete dato la possibilità di fare. Che cosa ha rappresentato? Sicuramente è stato la possibilità di mettere l'attenzione e di mettere insieme degli esemplari apparentemente identici ma di fatto molto diversi. Grazie al disegno di Giorgione abbiamo guardato con estrema attenzione l'incunabolo e ci siamo resi conto, in realtà qualcuno aveva già notato qualcosa, che il primo fascicolo dell'opera è di fatto costruito in modo diverso a secondo dei vari esemplari. Si tratta della stessa edizione, ma è un'edizione che è stata prodotta in modi diversi, in parte riutilizzando delle carte, dei fogli stampati in precedenza. E questo ha rappresentato una novità rispetto a quello che è lo stato degli studi, anche perché l'edizione precedente segue un testo leggermente diverso, quindi è stato possibile affermare con certezza la diversità delle due edizioni e quindi collocare l'impresa editoriale in un ambito particolare. Semplicemente questo, tutto questo perché cioè noi avevamo altri esemplari apparentemente, ripeto, identici, ma di fatto si tratta di materiali leggermente diversi, perché la differenza è sul primo fascicolo, sul primo fascicolo del testo. E questo, diciamo, il fatto di aver analizzato in un'ottica appunto per vedere e siamo partiti dall'idea di verificare l'integrità del pezzo di Sydney. Ci siamo resi conto che il pezzo di Sydney era integro, ma che si differenziava dagli altri, da alcuni degli altri. E
Posso chiedere un'interruzione che devo tradurre?
da lì che ha
Posso interrompere? Non sono un po' lungato per fare, quindi cerco di essere il più sintetico, ma cerco di rendere quello che avete spiegato. So just to sort of say that they said that it was a wonderful experience, very exciting experience, because to be able to see this copy, the Sydney copy in Rome, was meant to be at first to be just a check to make sure that to check the integrity of the copy, but then very quickly turned out to be a surprise, if you like, in the sense that they realized that actually the first pages of this edition differed. So the Sydney copy, the first page, differed from the copies of the same edition they had in Rome, which basically shed light on the production of this edition, which is a composite production. It's like a recycling of material from an earlier edition of this text. So it actually added an extra layer of excitement and complexity to this statement. Ho fatto del mio meglio. Grazie ancora, grazie per essere qui e per la vostra risposta. Are there any questions or comments? I'd like to invite the authors that have before me. I'd like to sort of say a few words or.
Could I ask a question of Paola? I think it would be.
Sorry, if I can do it this way.
Paola, I think it would be very interesting if you could explain what the synchrotron brought to the analysis of inks and how that assisted in the interpretation of the whole thing, because that is a first, I think, in the history of art. It's a first that the synchrotron analyzed drawing in red chalk, but also the subtlety of the analysis of the inks, which is impossible in any other diagnostic source.
The question I need to invite you to come to.
Thank you, Janie. And perhaps to give some context for my role in this amazing work was that at the time I was head of paintings conservation at the Art Gallery of New South Wales, when Julia Kim put the work into the gallery. The director of the museum at the gallery at that time, Dr. Michael Brand, had made available the resources of the conservation department to look at the work. And my colleague Annalise Tracy, who's actually the paper conservator, was the first to start looking at the book and using some of our in-house instrumental methods to try and just sort of gather some scientific data about the book and whether we could confirm an age and what we might be able to do with the imaging. And Annalise invited me in because I've been doing quite a lot of work with the synchrotron in regards to the paintings collections, and I was just about to embark on a project to take the rather gorgeous Carol Bronzino painting down to Melbourne, the painting of Cosimo de Medici in armour. And I suggested to Julian Kim that the book might be a good subject for the synchrotron, because our methodologies within the art gallery weren't high contrast enough to really get the information out of this very subtle drawing with red chalk. Although it looks quite strong on the page, it's actually very minimal material. Unlike a painting in which we have build-ups of paint layers, this is a drawing made from although we call it red chalk, it is actually a kind of soft red earth. It actually has no chalk in it. There is no calcium in it, for example. It's actually made of an iron oxide naturally combined with very soft silicates. And so we wanted to, at that point, we didn't really know what we were looking at. There'd been an initial Burlington magazine article and things were looking very, very strong in that, but there hadn't yet been in that material analysis to support that work. So we embarked on the synchrotron. And Daryl Howard, who couldn't be here tonight, unfortunately he had to leave suddenly for Canada, is a scientist at the Australian Synchrotron, and he is particularly in the area of X-rays. And he runs a particular part of the synchrotron that uses X-rays that come out of the synchrotron that are really, really finely tuned to a tiny beam. And he can shine those through an instrument that was developed between the synchrotron and CSIRO, a very special detector called a Maya detector, sold to synchrotrons around the world from Australia, an Australian discovery, and used that very fine X-ray beam to characterize the elements that were in the drawing as compared to the paper, as compared to the inscription. And then to combine all those individual tiny little samples into a single image in which we can see where is all the iron, where is all the copper, where is all the zinc. Those are the things that we find in the ink inscription. And do they compare to other studies of other inks from the same period, the same time, elementally? And I think that we found that they did look very good and that there was nothing there that we wouldn't expect from a red chalk drawing and an ink inscription from Venice at that date, which was terrific.
Really exciting. I'd like to ask a couple of questions from the audience, maybe.
Do you know how it got to Sydney, that book?
Good question.
I'm not going to answer that question. It's up to you. So,
Maybe
the question is,
I
would you like to maybe come and say a few words about how it got to Sydney? How did this copy make its way to Sydney?
Look, we have absolutely no idea. A lot of wonderful colleagues all around the world have looked at all sorts of sources. Unfortunately, there is an archive from one of the Hodgson's, one of the sellers at one stage, but that archive has been sold. And although we've had some very senior people in the rare book market make intercessions, it's in private hands and it's not available. So all of that, is really, I mean, through a lot of the work that was done in those early days, there weren't huge libraries. There wasn't training for librarians in rare books. And so, the practices and Kim's work on going back, she interviewed colleagues, that had retired, a very long time ago, to try and understand what the processes were in the library, what those numbers and, what records were kept. And it's disappointing, but it's also perhaps not surprising because all those years ago, people, I think, came to this country. This happens all the time in university libraries where families, really love a book and they treasure it and then they take it with them to another country or whatever. And then, but by the time it gets to the grandchildren, they're not really all that interested. And so, and quite often these, grandchildren might have been to a university, and so then they will give this book. They sort of realise that it's something important, and they'll give it to that university. But there were no records that we can find now, and so it will be an ongoing. We've got some really, really good contacts, and particularly in the rare book world, anytime anyone comes to Australia, we get them to have a look at it. There's all sorts of things about the bindings. It's been rebound. some of our colleagues, from Rare Book School, etc., around the world have, given us different ideas about, that's similar to a different binding that, came from a bindery outside of Cambridge. So, there's a lot of this is inconclusive, but, sometimes the fun is actually in the chase. Thank you.
Last question. Last burning question. Yes.
When can we get to see it?
Get to
Is
see
it
the.
going to be on show or is it too light sensitive?
It has been on show, hasn't it?
I don't know.
In Sydney.
Right, so it's
It
available.
has been, and there is some talk of
Do you want
an
to-
international exhibition. But Kim, do you want to talk about how it's been on show? And I think you can ask to see it.
Lovely.
Yes, and it's also digitised, and a high-res copy is available to view online at the University of Sydney Library website.
Oh, wait, thank you.
And on that note, sorry, I think we can bring this to a close. I'd like to thank Paolo Baracchi for hosting us tonight. CO.AS.IT, amazing conference starts tomorrow. All the medieval and modernists from Australia, New Zealand, and around the world will be coming together from tomorrow. So that's a great opportunity. And a huge thank you again to the editors and authors of this beautiful book. So congratulations.